All right, thank you very much. I'd like to call this meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Innu, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. The panel today will consist of myself as the chair. I am Mark Boreski. We have also Kira Penner and Richard Whitbread. The secretary today is Crystal Harland, and the assessor is Abhishek Ratan. I hope I have pronounced that properly. To the Zoom participants of the hearing, please note you're placed in the waiting room until your property is called upon. When it is your turn, you will be admitted into the meeting. Kindly follow along on the City of Winnipeg's Board of Revision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you into the hearing, please close or mute your YouTube player. You will then be permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing has concluded, you can leave the meeting. We'll be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that the comparison of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing two items today on the docket, numbers 2 and 3. And Ms. Harlan, could you please affirm the assessor's and the applicant's testimony?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Assessor, would you please state your full name?
Abhishek Ratan.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you were about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, would you please state your full name?
Stephen Charlebois Page.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. So we will proceed to the first one that we are dealing with, which is item number 2 on our docket. It's 1681 Grant Avenue. So, Mr. Ratan, could you please proceed when you are ready to give us your evidence?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. File number 24-2480, property address 1681 Grant Avenue. The 2025 assessed value based on April 1, 2023 is $1,353,000. It's a CMBSR. Moving on to page 2, I have the photograph of the subject property. The property is on Grant Avenue. Moving on to page 5, I have the income approach that was used to assess the subject property. It has a kiosk of $1,189 with a table rent of $42.04.
I'm just sorry, excuse me. Are you able to get a little closer to the microphone? You seem to be cutting in and out just a little bit.
Sorry, I'm joined from my phone, so maybe that's an issue.
It's clear when you're close to your phone.
Oh, okay. Is it good now?
That's better, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'll be going over the income approach that was used to assess the subject property. So the subject property has a kiosk for 1,189 square feet with a table rent of $42.24, which has a potential rent of 50,223 square feet, $50,223. We applied a vacancy loss of 2%, an expense rate of 3%, and a shortfall of $6 per square feet, which brings the net operating income as $47,599. We applied an overall cap rate of 5%, which brings the capitalized value for the subject property at $951,980. There is an additional building value to the subject property of 401,000. This additional building value consists of tanks, canopies, pumps. The total value for the subject property is $1,353,000. Now, if we move back to page number 4, I have a set of 3 rent comparables. These rent comparable have kiosk with the square feet size of 1,000 square feet to 2,400 square feet, with the rent range of $35 to $51.22. The average rent for these kiosks is $43.40. Moving on to pages 9 to 12, I believe, is the income and expense mailer that shows that this property is owner occupied. And going forward from pages 13 to the end of my brief, I have the photographs of the rent comparables. So to conclude, I would ask the board members to confirm 2025 assessed value for the subject property at $1,353,000. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Page, do you have questions for the assessor?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Could I first confirm with you that the value presented today is model generated?
That is correct.
So mostly here, this is a capitalization rate issue from my perspective. In terms of the rents, I mean, it's a smaller kiosk and, you know, you have your comparables there, but I'd like to take your attention to page 7 if you could. This is the information that the city's provided. It's stratified the model outputs into the different categories. Can I just confirm with you that the modeled cap rate for this property would likely come from the retail portion of this? Is that a fair statement?
So that is a fair statement for sure. Yes, that is right.
Okay. So this property has a 5% capitalization rate on the commercial store. Do you think this is in line with the market, given the range there provided?
I would think it has a lower cap rate for sure, and I could recommend is the cap rate for the subject property can be moved up to 5.5%.
Why 5.5? That's still outside of the range.
I would say the risk associated with any of the kiosk is smaller than any other retail shop. So that's why I would recommend 5.5% cap rate.
So when we look at retail assets in the city of Winnipeg and we take maybe the outlet mall or some of the higher end enclosed malls or anchored retail assets, they'd be listed under regional or power center in that chart.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the city of Winnipeg, or your opinion, that this asset is less risky than those and more valuable? Is that sort of where you're headed with that in terms of an investor's lock on income from a capitalization rate standpoint?
Yes, I would say that.
Okay. So the brokerage firms, there's a line above that chart that says, it's 2 paragraphs above that chart. It says ATD's cap rates are further supported by the market reports from the brokerage firms, Scott Collier, CBRE, and Cushman. I see their range for retail assets here, heading into the valuation date in Q1 2023, ranging from 6 to 7.5. Is that a fair statement?
That is correct, yeah.
So this is at a 5. I mean, yeah, if would you agree that it would be even aggressive in the low 5s, given the brokerage firms, the people selling these and leasing them, are stating a range of 6 to 7.5?
Yes, it has a low range for sure, yeah.
Okay. So, but and just to confirm, there's nothing in the brief provided today that's sort of indicating that a 5% cap is appropriate for this, right? There's no actual sales or evidence to back that position.
So this is a model generated cap rate. So whenever a model has been run by the different assessors in our department, they have analyzed multiple kiosks of these types, and the model has came up a value for 5% with that. But in order to support that, in my evidence, I have nothing to present.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Mr. Whitbread, do you have questions?
I'm gonna leave it until the applicant, thanks.
Ms. Penner?
Just one, please. I was wondering, I noticed that the effective date of the building has been moved up from 1958 to 1979. Just wondering if you can speak to that at all.
So there might be some kind of, I haven't looked at what kind of permits have been like completed in the past for the subject property, but there would be some kind of upgrades that have been done, because of which the effective year built is different from the actual year built.
That was my only question. Thank you.
Do you know, has this been a service station ever since the late 1950s, or do you know anything about the history of it?
I haven't looked at the complete history, but last year it was for sure a gas station.
Mm-hmm.
In the last appeal cycle also. So like almost 2023, if I say, this was
Mhm. Do you have any sense of how much of the business that this property does is people coming specifically to buy things in the store versus coming to buy gasoline?
I couldn't speak of that. No.
Okay. The comparables that you've provided, these are also kiosks, are they?
Yes, they are.
And they vary quite a bit in square feet. Are these all freestanding versus, say, part of a mall, a big mall, on a pad in as part of a mall? Are all these 3 freestanding locations like the subject?
Yes, they are most likely, yes. And I have pictures, except the comparable number 2. It's kind of on a small strip kind of area, but other than that, yes, they are free.
Okay. Now the rents per square foot, how much of a bearing does the actual square footage have? I mean, the biggest one is 2,400, and it's got a square foot rent of 35, versus the middle range one, which has the highest rent at 5,122. What's the interplay here between the size factor, and where these are? Are any of these 3 better locations than others?
In terms of locations, all of these are in major areas. The first one is on Osborne, the second one is on Henderson, and third one is on Queeton. So they have like high traffic areas. In terms of I would say, in our theories, we have been taught like smaller the area, higher the rent size. So I would speak that like the sizes were, since the smaller the size for the chaos, the higher would be the rent rate. In terms of like the second comparable, the lease started back in 1995, so that has the highest rent comparable for 5122. I'm unsure what the actual conditions were when the lease was taken in place, and it is quite a long lease from 1995 to 2037. So I'm unsure about what the conditions were actually placed when the lease took place.
Right. Okay, thanks very much.
Could-
Those are my
could-
questions.
Could I ask a follow-up question on that, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Sesser, is it your understanding that these are leasing based on the commercial store square footage or the commercial store sales?
My understanding would be they go by square footages.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Mr. Page, could we have your evidence, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Subject property is an owner-occupied gas station with a commercial store, built original age 1958. We have a convenience store on site with additional value added for the infrastructure associated with the gas pumps, tanks, canopies. And like I said, those are added in a cost approach value and listed as an adjustment on this property. Both the assessment authority and I have valued this on a mix of income and cost by virtue of that adjustment. Subject property site area is 12,000 square feet, and the current assessment is $1,353,000. So outside of that adjustment, I've set the cost and sales comparison aside and focused in on the income approach. I've provided rental rates within my brief. They are on page. Oh, sorry, my page numberings came off. I apologize. There's a chart there above my reconciliation of value, PDF page 12 if you're doing electronically. And for this, you'll see there's a mix of sites with commercial stores, car washes, small kiosks. This one falls between those several thousand square foot C-stores and the kiosks. So for my reconciliation of value, I've used the 4224 in place from the assessment authority. I've used the 2% vacancy allowance, $6 shortfall, and 3% non-recoverable, which is in line with the current assessment. And then in reviewing the capitalization rates, I surveyed retail assets and sales in the city of Winnipeg, trying to be as close to the April 1st, 2023 valuation date as possible. Within that range, we sort of stratify by top quality retail, average, and below average. These assets I would typically put in the retail top quality. None of them will be inferior. Most of them will have access to, predominant roadway, and obviously they're there to service the community in terms of the gas needs as well as the commercial store on site. So for my reconciliation of value, I've assigned something at a 6.5% capitalization rate. This takes into consideration sort of the range surveyed by Ryan, and as well taking into consideration the brokerage firms ranging between 6 to 7.5. This property abuts onto a residential neighborhood, and right at the rear of the site, you can see the tanks abutting it. In addition to my income value, I've mentioned the tanks, canopies, and gas station infrastructure. That I've also assigned $401,000, which is in line with the current assessment. That was done by the assessment authority through Marshall Swift, and those inputs are in line with what's at the site. I do not dispute that value. So on page 60, PDF page 16 of my brief, you'll see my income value. I am at $1,133,000 rounded downward. And just in terms of additional information, I would just say that noted interplay between size of convenience stores and rents on these assets won't lead you to the correct, valuation principles. I think these are mostly leased. It's my understanding they're leased mostly on literage output by the gas station, and the commercial stores are set there to bolster additional income. That being said, they are something we can look at for reference in terms of doing an income approach. That concludes my presentation. $1,133,000 rounded downward was my value. Thank you.
Mr. Rattan, you got questions?
No, I do not have any. Thank you.
Ms. Penner?
No questions for me, thank you.
Mr. Whitbread?
Couple.
Pardon me?
I have a couple.
Couple.
So when we look at the building value, I know you both agree, but neither one of you provided any detail. Is that standard practice in terms of the value that 401?
So it would be a cost approach of value done by the city and added purely as an adjustment. I'm with you, just as adjustment value. And in auditing that from our perspective, we've checked it within Marshall Swift ourselves on sample cases to see what the inputs are, if they're matching sort of what the market inputs are from Marshall Swift. And we were satisfied with that. And this is in line with what we've seen. So sorry, no specific valuation inputs through that system, but just the amount of tanks on site, as well as I guess sort of all the things you can see from the street, have been added in that value, and we are satisfied with that number.
So what the city would have done is gone to Marshall Swift, pulled out the tanks, the cost of the tanks, depreciated value of the tanks, the pumps, the canopies. And in your opinion, do you think they would have been using 1979 values if the tanks and pumps and canopy, which I think the canopy is new, I don't know about the pumps and the tanks. They would 1979 or 1958 value. Do you know where we're at?
Likely the 1979 effective age. I don't think the effective age on those tanks would move the needle. It's my understanding that the depreciation or the OR table of those type of assets is quite large, and my experience has been in the higher end of the range, due to they're meant and built to last longer times. Lots of standards in this industry. That being said, in terms of like the aesthetics on that canopy, mostly branding, mostly advertising, and not dissimilar to a car dealership would have standards within the industry, and that the owner would like to maintain, obviously, to maintain branding and no location left behind on 1980s branding, while the whole the rest of the service line moves up. So that'd be my thoughts on that.
When you talk about the owner, do you talk about the fuel company or the person running the business on a lease?
Fuel company would likely set the branding. That part, I won't pretend to have a detailed knowledge, but I would assume it would be the fuel company leading the branding standards. And then if there's franchisee situations or partial ownership, that would be maintained to their standard.
Jumping over to the cap rate, I'm trying to get my head around the notion of a cap rate difference here, 6.5 from you and 5.0 from the assessor, and something seems awry in my mind.
Yeah.
Can you explain we're talking 2023, can you explain the relationship between interest rates at that time and the cap rate? I know this is not necessarily a rate of return purely.
Sure.
Can you explain the relationship between cap rate and interest rates at the time, and what an investor looking at this particular business might be interested in?
Absolutely. I'll do my best. So heading into April 1st, 2023, I think that prime rate, 4.5%. There's a GIC return of 4.75. Sorry if I misquote that number, but close to that range, between 4.5% and 5%. And ultimately, the income approach to value, you kind of said it yourself there, is like, this is return on investment sort of math for an investor. If I have $1 million to invest in the market or get a government insured investment versus going to a depreciating asset, something with tenants, not in this case because it's owner occupied, but certainly that's the contemplation, right? There's a depreciating asset with a tenant. Obviously, you're entering a market that's completely different from a GIC, which is put the money away and turn away and look, and it produces sort of return on investment. So that's a component that goes into calculating a capitalization rate, and from there, there'll be a whole other slew of factors, including like overarching macroeconomic factors, as well as reviews of sales of similar properties, because ultimately other owners will be doing sort of same risk factors, risk calculations going into it. Unfortunately, with gas stations, we don't have enough sales to have a robust analysis of that. So you turn to retail assets. As Mr. Chair had mentioned prior, you know, were these located in anchored assets? He asked about those comps. Sometimes these are pad leases in larger shopping centers. And that's the best way when you look at sales of retail assets like that. It's the best way to sort of look at the risk and the sorry, my dog is barking at me. I apologize. To look at the risk from this type of income will be best calculated within those sort of retail assets. So I apologize if I maybe overspoke there, but that's sort of my determination. I look at this and I look at the retail sort of market going into this, and I see the brokers, the people selling them are showing between 6 and 7.5. This is an asset that won't have a robust amount of sales in it. I tend to lean towards what the predominant commercial cap rate is between 6 to 7%. And that's why I've chosen that sort of 6.5 where I landed.
So as an investor, if I can put it really simply, I'm going to be looking for something with a premium to invest my money in over what the 4.5 or 4.75 is. And to think that I might invest my money at 5% is not necessarily a good business practice. Would you agree with that thought?
I would absolutely agree with that. And if you do, you will, I would also advise the board that you will see caps go below that in, let's say, tier 1 market like Toronto and Vancouver, large flagship assets. The owners of those might be buying what I would say an investment opportunity, or large REITs that are able to hold assets on 25-year, 30-year schedule. They might have a different value to that asset than the typical buyer. But what you're saying is going to hold true with the majority of, you know, outside of that REIT and conglomerate sort of grouping, that will hold true. Why would I go to the market, take on a depreciating asset, deal with a tenant, when I can get 5% guaranteed on my money from a bond?
Yeah.
And that's yes, and that I would draw with that parallel, but I would also comment that previous point I made. I you know, there is some people that can look at that 30-year plan and might see something in a market that's worth the hold for them, just to qualify that.
I understand. So looking at your 6.5, have you added any sort of premium to that 6.5? Was it 6.25 or 6, and you put some premium on there for factors? I'm guessing I'll ask you, age, location, anything of that nature?
Sure, and maybe I'll just speak sort of anecdotally and off the cuff, as I've dealt with a number of these this cycle. And you're right, some of the ones that were 2018 in anchored assets in nicer spots, maybe I've gone down to a 6, but this one abuts a residential neighborhood. It's in a modest location of modest age, and I put it at a 6.5. That's not to say that I put it at the 7.5 or 7 at the bottom end. I do think it's not an inferior asset. I wouldn't say that at all. So that's sort of my thought. Yeah, there is a scale for these. This one, again, butts the residential neighborhood, not brand new, and that'd be my consideration for the 6.5.
Would you put it at a 6.25 or a 6?
I don't think in this case I would. I think if you were looking at comp 2 there, you see 1070 Henderson from the city. Just to give you an idea of what I would maybe go down on to, if you look on, and if the board will allow me, I'd go to page 16 of the assessor's brief. You'll see that location specifically is in an anchored asset. There's a Tim Hortons next door. This is part of a larger commercial grouping. That one I'd probably go down towards that 6.25, that maybe that 6. In this case, I don't think that's necessary. I think the 6.5 would take on the strong asset in a good commercial area, but it does abut residential. So that would be my consideration with that.
Thank you, and thanks for your patience, Mr. Chair. I'd ask that we carry this discussion over to the next property as well, just so I don't have to go through it again. Is that fair?
there may be some wrinkles with the next one, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Any other
No further-
questions?
No further questions.
Okay. Mr. Page, I'm wondering if you can help me with sort of a bit of a broader perspective on this property, and then that probably relates more to cap rate than anything else. Have you done a lot of kiosk type service stations and doing appraisals of them?
To be blunt, Mr. Chair, a predominant part of my career is in Ontario, where these are on the cost value in entirety. So all the pumps would be valued on the cost approach, and then the land would be assigned a land value based on sales. So this income approach to a gas station like this would be relatively new to me in the last 2 years. I would say I've reviewed these.
Okay. This property on Grant, are you aware of whether or not it has been a gas station ever since 1959?
I'm not sure about the early stage of that because we didn't. To be blunt, my historical files don't go back that far, even from what I'm able to review on my end. So I'm unsure. But I based on my research, it was there for a substantial period of time, and that's just from Street View. Was what I was able to. I think 2009 is my earliest picture of it, and that's all I was able to review.
Okay. What is the zoning on that property?
I'm unsure. I could pull it up, but
Maybe Mr. Assessor, are you able to
up here.
fill us in? Sorry, I don't have your brief open. It's probably there.
Sure.
C1. It's C1.
C1.
C1. Okay. So cap rate is in part a reflection of the durability of the use that is going on the property. This is I mean, it's not a large property. There's obviously been a gas station there for some time. There've been a lot of closures of gas stations. And would I be right in thinking that many of those are in um, standalone locations similar to this one on Grant versus ones that are part of a mall, for instance? And if you think of new service stations that have been built, are they predominantly on malls? And therefore, does that mean that this property is a little bit more of a risky property than if it was, say, down the street at the Grant Park Mall?
Sure, and I guess I'd respond to that and say, it'd be subjective in my opinion, but yes, I guess you could say that because a lot of the new ones I have seen are built in on anchored assets, or at least shadow anchored. They're in strong locations that are next to prominent sort of retail outfits, whatever that might be, enclosed malls or box stores or power centers. And yeah, there has certainly been a downsizing, and some of that, obviously, depending on the region you're in, can come from mergers, which I think we'll see in maybe the next property. There's a sale of the Husky brand that went into Co-op, which is a portfolio sale. And to your point, perhaps maybe that service grid shrinking down and losing some of these smaller standalone guys. And maybe in consideration of that too, Mr. Chair, is the life after some of these older gas stations. You do have tanks buried and considerations to be made with what that means for a future investor. So I would agree with you. Perhaps more risk there.
Well, there's a location farther down Grant that used to be a service station. It's still vacant. Perhaps that's because of environmental issues, but if somebody was to purchase this, the willing buyer who is going to buy this from the willing seller, if they may be buying it in order to carry on with the current business, particularly if it's got a long history and there aren't other factors that would compel that to change. But alternatively, are there other uses that the property could relatively easily be put to? If there are other uses it could be put to, would that perhaps mean a lower cap rate? If it is very confined as to what its uses might be, does that mean it's a higher cap rate? What are your thoughts on that?
I think, and not to speculate too much, but I think if you'd be correct in saying if there was restrictions in terms of future use, obviously that would be contemplated in the cap rate for a future purchaser. And without speculating into remediation for these sites, I would speak anecdotally. Again, I have one in Ottawa. I know it's outside of this jurisdiction, but a former site that's used for a snow dump in the winter. And obviously that allowance, I think, was made in knowing that obviously the site could have challenges, certainly in being remediated into a different asset. So I have nothing to quantify that sort of on a larger scale, but I would agree with you that restricted use would lead to a higher cap.
Okay. That's all my questions. Thank you very much.
May I jump back in just for a moment?
Yes, yes, you may.
I'm looking at your page, property, land, and improvements description, and unfortunately, the page numbers have gone. Can you find that page?
I found
It
it.
is PDF page 6. Yep.
Sorry, I could have told you that.
Sorry.
I'm looking at the last paragraph. Did I hear the assessor say this is zone C1? But it says
Yes,
C2
he did.
here. And it's not a big issue, but it says C2 here. But I go on to see that it's the site of a former turbo gas bar. And my memory is it was that for an awfully long time. And it appears on the Manitoba Conservation Stewardship Contaminated Impacted Sites list. Now, with that contamination, and we're thinking, what are we talking here? About 70 years of contamination, assuming it was a gas station back to 1958. Is that going to have an impact on the cap rate?
Yes, it would. And again, I would just correct that. It is C1 zoning. I just confirmed on the city zoning map. So that's an error on my behalf, and I apologize.
Sure.
But it would. But with respects to contaminated sites, I would just say until that is explored through a study, quantifying it would be tough, but I think you could certainly say from a market perspective, and certainly a market participant who wished to change the use of this site, that would definitely be flagged.
For example, that may limit, as an investor, that may limit me. I may not be able to put a kindergarten on that site, or a daycare center or a strip mall because of the retail nature of people coming and going. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And it'd be speculative as to how much remediation or what would be required. Obviously, like someone would need to conduct a full study, but I think you could say, broadly speaking, that you and Mr. Chair just alluded to, yes, this would cause concern in terms of a capitalization rate from a prospective buyer as of April 1st, 2023.
Thank you. No further questions.
Maybe I'll turn back to the assessor on this point, cap rate and possibility of contamination and things like that. With all of the kiosks that your data would be relying on, what is your view of the history of changes to properties that have gone on, formerly having been service stations and are no longer? Do they have to remain without the development on them for a long period of time? Are any of the other ones that you're familiar with, have they been redeveloped over time because the owner has found that there is still a good market, he can put more investment into this property? Can you give me a little bit of information that would help me think about the implications of that on cap rate?
So I would be very honest with you guys. It is what I understand when I look at the gas station, it is like it has a lower risk involved when compared to other investments. When looking at the contamination for the land, I have there are only I only came across one of the land which was contaminated and which had to follow other provincial procedures to get that cleaning. Cleaning, I don't know what was the exact address. Um, and in terms of in terms of developing the gas stations, I actually know there was one on. Um, I just forgot the street address. I know there was earlier a gas station or a kiosk which was damaged, and again it was they were making one new one on it itself. And now Husky has there has been a huge there was a mass sale for the Husky gas pumps and has been taken over by Co-op. Uh, Unknowingly, what was the real reason behind it, I have no ideas about that, but that shows me that there is still bigger players in the market who want to invest in this market, and and as for them it seems like it is a good investment.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions before we move along?
None.
Do either of the parties want to make a summary?
No, I'm good, thank you, Mr. Chair.
No, thank you, Mr. I'll just make a brief summation on the next property. It's very similar, so
All right.
I'll withhold on this.
Okay. Well, then let's move along to the next property. And that one is at 1011 Marion Street. So, Mr. Rattan, could you give us your evidence on this one, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. File number 24-2485, roll number 0603218950, property address 1011 Marion Street. 2025 assessed value based on April 1, 2023 is $1,141,000. The current use is CMVSR with a zoning of M3. Moving on to page 2-3, I have some side photographs of the subject property. Moving on to page number 4, it shows that the subject property had a recent sale back in September 14, 2020, 2022. This is the sale that we were talking about. It was a mass sale involving taking over the Husky gas pumps by Co-op. Moving on to page 6, I have the income approach that was used to assess the subject property. It is a kiosk of 864 square feet with a table rent of $44.51. The potential rent from the subject property was $38,457. We applied a vacancy loss of 2%, an expense of 3%, and a shortfall at $6 per square feet, which brings the net operating income at $36,453. We applied a cap rate of 4.55%, which brings the capitalized value at $801,165. There are again additional values of $340,000, which reflect the tanks, canopies, pumps, and the total estimated value for the subject property is $1,141,000. Now, the subject property has a cap rate of 4.55% because the co-op did major renovations to the property, and that is why it has a lower risk. Another thing which wasn't added to my brief was this specifically subject property has an excess land of 132 into 289, which brings 38,148 square feet in total. This land had a storage building on it which was damaged and is not part of our current valuation. So the excess land and the building that was damaged, there was no value added to the subject property. Moving back to my brief now, I have two rent comparables in order to support the table rent for the subject property, which are on page 5. The first comparable is 705 Osborne Street, and the second one is comparable number 2 on 1070 Henderson Highway. The square footage for my rent comparables is 1,680 square feet, and the range between of my rent comparable leases is $43.99 and $51.22, with an average rent of $47.60. Moving on to the income and expense mailer, that is on page number 10 to 13. Again, it's an owner-occupied gas station. And moving on to pages from 14 to the end of my brief are the photographs of my subject property. So to conclude, I would ask the board to confirm 2025 assessed value at $1,141,000. Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Page, do you have questions for the assessor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I do. Could I first confirm with you that the value presented today is model generated?
Yes, it is.
The sale you mentioned, is that arm's length?
It is, yes.
Are portfolio sales, in your experience, arm's length?
Sorry. I mean to say it's a portfolio sales, and the sale wasn't included in our analysis.
So
So
it's non-arm's length. then.
non-arm's length.
It was okay. Sorry, I just
Sorry, that's
wanted to
fine.
make. Yeah, I know. Okay, good. I had a follow up that maybe there's business value in that, but you guys have it flagged as non-armed, so I'll move on. Do you think it's likely that the demolition of that decrepit building that you mentioned might be in excess of any land value assigned to that space?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question once, please?
Yes. So you mentioned a decrepit building, a building that's no longer fit for occupation, that's on the site. Do you think it's likely that the model and the city haven't assigned value to that due to the fact that demolition costs of that might be in excess of any land value?
No, I do not think that. I mean, there was no additional value added to the building because of that access land. So we didn't add any values to that access land that was provided, that the subject property has right now.
Okay, and I haven't had the chance to review it because you verbally stated a number of excess land. Could I just maybe confirm with you, were all setbacks mandated by municipal guidelines and all considerations for minimum parking requirements and space to sort of operate that gas station? Was that all contemplated in that number you put forward?
Sorry, I don't have that. I don't know. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Back to the cap rate, 455 on this property. We'll go to page 8. I won't spend too much time on this, but again, here we have a capitalization rate that's far outside of the range of both the City of Winnipeg study and more than 2 points or 1.5 points away from the bottom line of the broker's range for retail assets. Do you think that this is aggressive?
Yes, this is a bit aggressive. Yes.
Okay, and is there any information in your brief today that would support a 4.55 capitalization rate for a retail asset in the City of Winnipeg?
No, there is none.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Mr. Whitbread, questions?
Certainly. I'm looking at, I think it might be page 3 or 4. Sorry, I've got the thing blown up. It's page 2, your photographs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at the aerial view of the property. Where is that decrepit building?
If I just bring that up, just give me 1 second.
Yeah. I'm looking at the photo with the red dot indicating the property.
Right. Yes, that's the subject property. But just 1 second. I just want to make sure that I provide you the correct information that I have. So the property that was removed, we have the red dot, right? And just so if you move on the, like, there's a small shed on the property on that photograph.
Is that just above the red dot? Looks
Yes.
like a small building with
Yeah.
grass, something beside it?
Yes, that was the property that was removed.
Okay, so then go further up to the edge of the property, keep going that direction.
Yes.
Is there a communications tower or something on this property?
Communications tower. I guess so. Yes, there is some. There is some kind of like a tower, small tower.
And then what is that other? It looks like a structure, right?
That used to be a fuel distribution facility or a small office for that on the very right side. Is that the one we are talking about right now? The
Yeah,
page.
so is that maybe the decrepit building then?
No, the building I was actually checking the eye view, like the aerial view that we have.
Okay,
The building that was removed was just above the red dot where we have a small shed right now. On page 2, the first photograph, we have the red dot,
yeah,
and just on the top of that, I think
Yeah.
there was a building there which was removed, which I don't see anymore.
yeah, okay. But this other building that I see on page 3 is still there, correct?
Yes, it is there. It's still there. Yes.
Okay, so when I look at this document, the overhead view, did you contemplate having excess or surplus land assessed to this property?
So there was no so honestly speaking, when I was like everything was in place, and then I was reviewing this document with my manager, and then they brought up this that they have an access land, which wasn't taken into consideration for the assessment purposes in 2025, and we have not included that in our valuation system in our valuation, and we just left that over.
Okay, so with a land to plan ratio of 78.08, one would suspect that one could possibly have excess or surplus land, it sounds like, yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's for further years. No further questions, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Penner?
So I was just wondering if you had mentioned that there's been significant renovations or upgrades to this property, but I see that there's no adjustment to the effective date. So are those upgrades being incorporated into that for 4.55% cap rate?
Yes, most likely they are, but the effective year bills were not changed. If we change the effective year build for the subject property, the valuation will be changing, which will be an increase in the table rent, and there will be a decrease in the cap rate. So possibly, if there was a movement in the change of the effective year build, the cap rate may go more lower than that.
Could I ask a follow-up? Sorry, Mr. Chair, I don't know if you.
If you could just hang on a
Yep.
second, we'll finish with Ms. Penner first.
I'm good. Thank
You're
you.
done? Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Page?
Sorry for the interruption. So two things. One, did you just say that the model would have contemplated a newer effective age? I think it would have contemplated the original age that's on record. Is that a fair point, Mr. Assessor?
So the actual year built and the effective year builds are the same, so they are 1996.
Yes. So it didn't contemplate the updates from co-op. Now, the updates from co-op, based on my review, are branding related. Is that not a fair statement? This was a former Husky and they put in the stuff to rebrand to co-op.
So the Husky, yeah, it was Husky, and then they changed it to co-op. Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
But there were some renovations done involving fuel dispenser changing, wiring of electrical wirings. I see the permits that were pulled.
And that would be contemplated in sort of the Marshall Swift adjustment you guys have made for the fuel components. Is that correct?
But yes, that would be correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, this property is a highly unusual one, I would say, given the fact that only a very small portion of the land area is actually used for the convenience store and the gas pumps and the canopy. Do you know anything about the history of this? I'm looking at that building that I assume from what has been said is the one that was torn down. It says Mohawk Bulk Fuel Distributors. So were there at one time tanks on this property?
Yes, so there were like 10,000 gallon underground tanks on this.
Underground tanks.
Yes. And I'm just really I know because I'm actually reviewing the some of the permits that were associated to this building,
Uh-huh.
and they mentioned that there were 10,000 gallon underground tanks and associated piping with it.
Okay. So now, yeah, please describe for us the difference between surplus land and excess land, and which is this?
So this is an excess land,
Mm-hmm.
and to my understanding, it would be the excess land holds some value, but surplus land wouldn't hold value.
And this land could be potentially subdivided
That
for
would
different use?
Yes, that could be.
Okay.
But again, they might have to follow all the zoning requirements and
Right. But for one reason or another, you have placed no value on that at all. You have only assumed that there is a rent of 44.51 on 864 square feet. You have added the additional building value of 340,000, but nothing for all the rest of that land, correct?
that is correct. And the reason behind is that it just skipped in our eye that there is some kind of excess land to this property, and that I was reviewing this with my manager. We brought this up, but it was too late to add some value to this property, so we are leaving for the next reassessment cycle.
I see. All right, that's my questions. So let's move on to Mr. Page. Your information, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have another owner-occupied gas station built in 1970. Convenience store is 864 square feet with additional infrastructure associated with gas pumps, tanks, and canopies. Mixed of cost and income approach taken by both the assessor and myself. Site area 65,340. Current assessment 1,141,000 in the commercial class. So I'll start with my income value, and again, apologies for the page numbers, but 13 of 23 PDF page. I have some comps there. Sort of difficult again, given the size difference between the stuff that's at 2,000 or 1,500 to 3,000 square feet in terms of the convenience stores, ranging from 25 to 30 bucks. This one is smaller, so the rate on it at 44.51, I took no issue with. Sort of just interpolating the smaller size of the asset, generating a more aggressive rent. The 2% vacancy allowance, $6 shortfall, and 3% non-recoverable is in line with the city's assessment, current assessment value, and I do not dispute those figures. I do dispute the aggressive capitalization rate thrown on by the city. Again, I've reviewed that range of commercial sales, or retail sales, I should say, and reviewed the range of retail top quality. My range 6.5 to 7. I've applied 6.5 in this case. I've added the 340,000 in assessment under adjustments for the tanks and infrastructure used with the gas station. And again, on PDF page 17, you see my reconciliation of value, 901,000 rounded, and that concludes my evidence.
Mr. Rattan, do you have questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So my first question would be, in your value, did you account for the excess land that is on the subject property?
No, and I think perhaps that might be surplus land. When those tanks came out of there, and that site was covered up, if you look at the overhead, perhaps there is no utility in that. It would be something that I would contemplate, given a discussion we just had. It's a former Mohawk tanks that were buried down there. Without knowing, if any study or anything's been conducted, I would not make the distinction between surplus and excess land on that area.
Okay. And the second question was, since Co-op took over the gas station, so do you think this the cap rate of 6.5 is a good cap rate for the subject property, knowing that the another business is taking over the gas station?
Absolutely, I do. I think that commercial cap rates in the city of Winnipeg for retail assets are between 6 and 7.5%. Maybe you can go up higher to 8 for non-investment grade, things that are, sort of not anchored, maybe don't have bathrooms in the units, lower finishes. So I absolutely would think that a 6.5% capitalization rate would be in line with that. And the people selling these things would agree with me with their range at 6 to 7.5.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Penner, do you have questions?
Yes, please. Just one. We spoke a little bit on the last property about location, and I'm just wondering if you can speak to that on this property in terms of access, egress, surrounding uses, that kind of thing.
Sure. So this one is on the fringe of the Mission Industrial Park. And the last one was abutting sort of a residential neighborhood. This one would be more mixed commercial industrial. And you'd likely be looking at clientele on the way home from work or through traffic, rather than the last one that was probably servicing that immediate neighborhood. But in consistency with these assets, I would say that, gas stations would be set up on commercial throughways, obviously to attract people's attention, to swerve off, grab their gas and keep going. So I don't think many of these would be in what I would call inferior locations. So certainly just a difference. I would say this is more of a mixed commercial industrial, where the last one was maybe more commercial and residential.
Thank you. That's all I had.
No problem.
Related to that, this one compared with the previous one on Grant, is this got higher traffic volumes than Grant or not?
I would say probably yes, probably. I don't obviously have a way to give that sort of a quantifiable number, but I would think that this would likely see more through traffic.
Okay. If you've done a fair number of gas stations, can you tell me on relatively high traffic streets, is it more advantageous for the gas station to be on I would call it the inbound versus the outbound side of the street? Inbound into the city towards the downtown, outbound being away from it. Implication being that it's going to be a little easier for you to stop in and get gas in the morning if it's on the inbound side, and the reverse for the other side. Is there anything to that has any implications for the valuation of a gas station?
I would say, Mr. Chair, that typically yes, because these are leased on literage, but the way we're valuing this with a mix of cost and income approach, it'd be more of a subjective consideration versus if we were, or if let's say that the government mandated that these were valued based on output, like that's similar in other jurisdictions where you'll see sort of utilities or energy producing assets are assessed on sort of their output. But to answer your question, the way that it's currently valued, I would say that would be more of a subjective consideration. But to your point, yes, if the access were better and there were more through traffic positioned in a place of coming and going, commute to work, then yes, it would be.
Okay. And I'm looking at the building that is behind the convenience store in your aerial photo doesn't show up quite the same way in the assessor's photo, aerial photo rather. So that's the one that has been torn down, correct?
Correct. And I think there's a just in further review leading up to the hearing, there's actually depending on what street you're on, if you're looking at the property from Marion or if you're looking at it from the the side road there on, is it Holden? Let me just get
Right.
that name. On Holden Street, the aerial and the street view change. So that's maybe the confusion, is that one might be more dated than the other. So the one on Marion, I think, is more up to date. But yes, it is different. I think that rear building with the Mohawk sign, yes, was on mine and not on theirs.
Okay. Holden itself is quite a wide right of way. The communication tower that you see in the oblique photo, somewhat substantial communication tower, but is that accounted for in the additional building value, or is it simply the pumps and the canopy?
I think that would not be included. I couldn't say without a detailed cost breakdown from the city in this case, but no. And I do wonder if any of that's infrastructure is associated with the hydro lines. There are hydro lines running both north, south, and east, west across the front of this. But I'm unsure if any of that's infrastructure associated with that in the form of an easement or generating income.
And do you know whether that communication tower is on the subject's land or is it in the right of way?
I do not know, so I would I couldn't provide you a good answer to that question.
All right. That's all my questions. Does anybody else have follow-up questions?
I just want to ask a question about that small building across the street from the communication tower. Is that an actual building? Well, it looks like a building when I look at your photo, your aerial photo. And it seems to fall within the property line if I look at the assessor's map. You see what I'm talking about?
Are you talking about sorry, on the north end of the site? Sorry, up Holden, the way that's up, most up Holden.
I would say that's west.
So yes, sorry, and I do see there's a on the neighboring site there appears to be trailers, truck trailers, temp trailers there on the fence line, and I'm unsure if it's one of those. But
if you look at the assessor's map on his page 2, it's very clearly within the boundary mark.
Yes. Sorry, and I don't see that on the street view that I have, but I'd be unable to speak to sort of how permanent a structure that is or what its purposes. So I apologize.
Could we ask the assessor, Mr. Chair?
Certainly.
Mr. Rattan, do you see the building we're talking about?
Are we talking about the small building on the right side where on my brief it says near the Holden Street?
Yes, it's closer to Holden Street.
Yes, I think it's the Mohawk Fuel Distribution building that we're talking about.
But it's still present on the premises.
Yes, that is right. Yes.
Okay, and it hasn't been accounted for, or has it been accounted for in the 340,000?
I haven't reviewed what was accounted in the additional building value, but there should be some kind of value to the property for sure.
Yeah, see, that's why it's useful for us to see those numbers.
Yeah.
To just get a number 340,000, then have to go and become a detective to see what's on the property is
Sorry.
fair to us, but neither here nor there. Okay, thank you. No further questions.
All right. Any need for summaries from either party?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, I will just take a brief summary on both of these. I would just ask that the board review sort of the retail sales provided and sort of look to the range that even the brokers are providing. The people selling these are showing commercial caps between 6 and 7.5. Poor interest rate climate as we approach the valuation date. Investors will look at that in terms of return on income investment, and that's my summation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, then that concludes this item. And given that we only had 2 left on our docket, that then concludes our session today. Thank you very much for your appearances and the information that you have provided. We will be deliberating and coming up with the orders that will be sent to you as quickly as we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Thanks, guys.
Bye now.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you, everyone.
Mr. Chair, I'll take us offline and may we have a 7 to 10 minute break, please?
Certainly.
Okay, just a moment, please.